Come, join me by the candlelight. My aunt's family lived in a community about 20 miles south of Gallup, New Mexico. The area is far different from where I live. My house is surrounded by desert, and you don't really see trees until you move into the canyon. Bread Springs is a forested area, and where our story takes place. Like many people on the reservation, my aunt's family didn't have running water or electricity. In order to have water, they would have to drive into town and haul water back in large containers. The containers are huge and easily fit in the bed of a truck. Her family would place 2 containers on a long flatbed trailer to make the best of each trip. Her family went into Gallup, filled up the containers, and went around town doing other types of business. Back then, seatbelt laws weren't so strict, and so my aunt and her siblings sat in the bed of the truck as they went around town. It began to get dark, and so the family started back home. Most roads weren't paved, and so they had to drive carefully because of the attached trailer. The lights of town faded away in the distance, and soon the vehicle was shrouded in darkness. They drove, and the kids sat in the back and talked amongst themselves. That was until my aunt noticed something. A figure was crouched by the farthest water container on the flatbed. The truck wasn't barreling down the road, but it was going at a speed that would be impossible for anyone to run and jump on. My aunt nudged her siblings, and they all paused to look at the dark figure. They sat silently and squinted their eyes to look. It was too dark to really make anything out, and so they ignored her and continued to talk. My aunt kept her eye on the figure and pulled hard on the sleeve of her brother when the figure began to crawl over one of the water containers. The kids all stopped and watched in horror as the figure began to move carefully over the second container. My aunt said that the figure looked like a person. However, the limbs were abnormally long. These long limbs pulled its body closer to the kids. At this point, they began to scream and cry. They banged on the window of the truck. At this time, the creature was reaching for the tailgate of the truck. Due to the huge commotion that was now going on in the bed of the truck, the driver slammed on the brakes. The creature hit the tailgate and fell down in between the truck and the trailer. The driver rolled down the window and asked what was going on. The kids screamed at the driver to go. They weren't sure they were safe until they saw that the trailer moved up and down as if it ran over something large. When my aunt told me this story, I sat in disbelief. She told me that she was uncomfortable when it was crawling on the trailer, but true fear rang through her body when she saw its eyes. I asked her what she meant. She said that they were like teddy bear eyes. I didn't quite understand what that meant until I pressed further. She said that its eyes were shiny. When you shine the light in the eyes of an animal, they reflect back. The brake lights were shining, and whatever they saw that night had eyes that glowed black. One evening, my aunt was home with her siblings. Her parents run into town to do some errands and wouldn't be back until it was late. She lived in a pretty rural area, surrounded by a thick forest. Her house was pretty small, and they had a few horses. Their horse corral was quite a ways off from their house. Each evening, the kids would be sent out to tend to the horses by giving them hay and filling the water troughs. The hay bales were stacked near the barn. The bales of hay were large, each about 4 feet long, 2 feet high, and 3 feet wide. There was a stack of these large bales, maybe 30 of them. My aunt said that they didn't have a very large barn, and so they would keep the hay outside and cover it up when it rained. As they were taking hay to the horses and filling the water troughs, my aunt heard a sound. It was a shuffling, scratching noise. The sound was amplified when all of the children stopped to listen. Where they lived, it was so quiet. They could hear the wind softly blowing the trees, but then it would be interrupted by the sound. My aunt's older brother walked round to pinpoint the sound. It was coming from behind the hay. There was a space between the hay and the barn, not very big at all. The kids all looked and saw something dark wedged between the bales of hay and the wall of the barn. When it moved, its body scraped against the hard surface of the barn. The kids wondered what it was. No one was sure. They figured that whatever it was harmless and went to finish their work. It started to get darker, and the kids thought they would look to see if the thing was still there. It was still wedged against the wall, but this time, it wasn't moving. Suddenly, it began to cry out like a cat. Meowing began to come from behind the hay. It sounded strange. It was off. Whatever was behind the hay was too large to be any cat. My aunt said they got very scared because the more they listened to the noise the thing made, the more it is sounding like a person trying to mimic a cat. The kids went inside the house and locked the door. By this time, it was dark. The kids were sitting in the house, not talking very much. My aunt said that her brother told them to be quiet, and he kept peeking out the window towards the barn. Suddenly, loud noises were heard. Rapid pounding was coming from above, as if someone was running on the roof. My aunt said that it had to be a person because the footsteps were so loud. She began crying and screaming as the footsteps ran back and forth. Whatever it was ran back and forth on the roof for several minutes. None of the kids were brave enough to investigate. The footsteps finally stopped. It got very quiet, and the kids sat together, shaking with fear. Their attention was drawn back to the door. They heard noises coming from outside. They all huddled together, bracing themselves for the worst. The door opened and dread was immediately substituted with relief as their parents walked in the door. My aunt and her siblings told her parents what had happened, and they thought that was the end of their horrifying encounter. However, as the days went on, her family would hear the footsteps on their roof at night. Whoever it was would run back and forth, even when her parents were home. She said that her dad would open a window and yell at whoever it was in Navajo. He would tell it to leave his family alone, and then he would begin to pray. My aunt says that eventually the footsteps stopped, but that this was not the last encounter that she would ever have with skinwalkers. There's a small community called Church Rock that is a few miles outside of Gallup, New Mexico. Many of the people that lived here have had the land passed down many generations. This is where our story begins, 2 generations ago. There was a woman that was infatuated with a man in her community. She requested that the man build her a home. In exchange, she would give her daughter to the man to serve as his maid. The woman thought that, as the man worked on her home, she could woo him in the process. The deal was sealed, and the man built the woman the house. The man collected his payment, but instead of having the daughter as a maid, he married her. The mother became so enraged with jealousy and ran the newly married couple out of the community. The couple relocated to Rama and started a new life. They had 6 children, 2 of which were twin girls. In the Navajo tradition, twins are seen as very powerful. In the mythology of Navajos, the children of the sun were twins, and so they are held in very high regard. This is the story from one of those twin girls. The family began construction on a new home. While they were building the house, the children would play outside as the adults worked. As they were playing, the older twin noticed an animal emerge from the woods. It was a coyote. Usually coyotes are very skittish and avoid humans at any cost. This coyote made its way closer to the girl. A strange smell filled the air like something dead. The coyote came right up to her. She said that the coyote didn't bite her, but instead put its mouth over her mouth and began to suck the breath from her. It was at this point that she lost consciousness. One of the adults was working on the house and saw what was happening, and everyone rushed towards the coyote and the girl. The adults yelled and shouted as they ran towards them. The coyote darted back into the woods and the girl fell to the ground. She was blue. The family worked very fast and they were able to resuscitate her. The incident resulted in the family going to see a medicine man. He told them that it was the grandmother, still harboring jealous feelings towards her own daughter and her family. They had a prayer done, and it was thought to be the end of it. Later, the family received news that the grandmother had died. As the years passed, construction on the home continued, and the twin girls continued to grow. The family had built the first story of their home and moved in. The twin sisters shared a bedroom and slept together on a king-size bed. It was a hot summer night, and the family kept all of the windows open to keep the rooms cold during the night. One night, the older twin arose to use the restroom. The family kept a small light on in the hallway. She got out of bed, walked down the hallway, and did her business. She returned to bed. As she was covering herself up, she happened to look up, and she froze in horror. There, at an open window, was a coyote, its eyes shining from the hallway light. The window was pretty high, and so the coyote had to have been standing on its rear legs. The girl was frozen with fear and made a complete eye contact with the coyote. It was then that she noticed the same smell, the smell of death. She snapped and ran out of the room screaming and crying. She ran to her parents' room and got her father. He ran into the bedroom, half expecting it to be a figment of his daughter's imagination, but the strong smell hit him, and there was the coyote still standing at the window. The father yelled and ran to get his rifle. The man ran out of his home, but the coyote was gone. The family tried to comfort the little girl, but she sobbed until morning. Again, the family sought out a medicine man. He explained to the family that the hatred that the grandmother had for the family was so strong that the ill intentions that she had for the couple and their family proceeded even after the grandmother's death. When the family was blessed with twins, the grandmother knew of the strength it would bring to the family, and so she wanted to get rid of one of them. The older twin recalls these events vividly and swears that the coyote that attempted to suffocate her and the one at her window were one and the same. Even the scent of death was familiar, the second time she encountered the creature. She hasn't seen it since that night and is very grateful for it.